So, morning. Welcome, everyone. And thanks for joining us for a new round of talks sponsored by Epicenter. This is Veronica Cancelliere. I'm the head of comms at the Istituto Bruno Leoni in Milan. And today we're going to talk about the state of the art of the European digital regulation. Now, as we know, the EU presently has about 100 pieces of regulation pertaining different aspects of digital services and technology, with more than 270 regulators engaged in digital governance across the Union. So, taking into account the recent call for simplifying the Union's regulation in order to foster a more dynamic digital landscape in Europe, today we will also try to gain some more clarity on what could be the Commission's way forward. And in order to do so, we asked to join us to our three speakers today. First of which is MEP Salla from the group of the European People's Party. Madam Salla is former public policy director and head of EU affairs for Meta in Brussels. And as far as her experience goes within the European institutions, she was also a member of the cabinet for Vice President Katainen. So thank you for being with us today. Our second speaker today is Madam Anupriya Datta. Madam Datta is a tech reporter at Euractiv, and she's been covering the developments of EU's digital regulation, as well as their most recent outcomes, of which I think we're all aware about. And thank you for joining us today as well. Last but not least, I would like to welcome Professor Giuseppe Colangelo, who teaches competition law and economics at the University of Basilicata in Italy, and is also a fellow of the Stanford Law School and University of Vienna's Transatlantic Technology Law Forum. So thank you as well for joining us today. So I would like to kickstart our talk by going a little bit around the table and asking our speakers to share with us their own take on the Commission's current digital strategy. And I would like to start with Madam Salla, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here today. So for me, this has been, how would I even say, this tsunami of regulation. It has been super unfortunate for the companies in the EU. The whole idea behind this has been that, the EU is trying to catch the big tech. But the problem is that the way these regulations are designed, they will never catch the big tech. What will happen and what happens right at this moment is that our own companies cannot grow in their home market because, first of all, they don't have a home market. Second of all, of uncertainty of this regulation that we put in place. Third of all, lack of risk capital. Fourth of all, lack of talent. And I would say the fifth thing also is that we don't see this enabling tendency in the EU. We don't allow these companies to take risk. We try to regulate the risk even before innovation happens. And this is why we don't see any global competitors for these big tech companies coming from the US. Because the EU cannot catch these companies whose own home market is enabling, lets them take risk, lets them to grow, and that's why they are as big as they are. We can go deeper on different regulations, but what we saw right now, for example, with the ex-ante regulation, the DMA, the aim was again very good, but this regulation will never break these companies. How they see these fines also proposed today or put forward today, it's cost of doing business for them. It's drop in the ocean. So I would ask the Commission what they will do with Booking.com and Zalando when they grow the be this big, as Booking already grew the be this big. So at the same time, they are giving these big speeches wanting to have European digital champions. But then when you grow to be big, you will split these companies. I'm sorry, the EU is getting this completely wrong? So this would be my starting point for this conversation.
Thank you very much, Madam Salla. Now I would like to move on to Madam Datta, also to hear her thoughts on why this widespread call for simplifying regulation and actually enabling a digital environment to grow in Europe has not yet been heeded.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me, and thank you very much for having me. I think I would like to start by saying that it's really an interesting time to cover EU digital laws and the conversation around it. Initially, tech was seen just as a small bubble, maybe that appealed a small group of Brussels nerds, but now it's really become part of a larger geopolitical conversation. Now with the DMA and the DSA, of course, every part of its enforcement is seen as the backdrop with the US. I think for us as reporters, it's interesting to see, on the one hand, how the Commission is handling its relations with American companies, and also, on the other hand, how it's trying to reconcile, indeed, trying to find these European digital champions under its existing regulatory framework. These discussions are just not in the tech realm, so as to speak, but also within the political, economic, and general geopolitical realm. I mean, we saw yesterday the responses from Meta and Apple when the Commission announced these fines, which they really, for example, Meta announced that this is really against American companies, and the DMA does not particularly target European and Chinese companies. And Apple, for example, said that this might affect the privacy of European consumers. So it's really, it will be really interesting to see now how the Commission reacts to this, firstly, how they will try to reconcile this, how in the future they plan to have these American companies to work in the EU through their rules, but also how they will deal, if possible, with new European companies. Under the DMA, there's one American company and one Chinese company in its scrutiny. Under the DSA, there are more. There's also some dispute against the designation, but also it's a bit unclear now how the Commission will address the simplification push. So yeah, happy to delve a bit more deeper on these topics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lastly, I would like to hear Professor Colangelo's thoughts.
Well, first of all, let me thank you for organizing this event, and thank you for having me. Well, I would say that several interesting things has been already said. We know that in recent years, Europe has characterized and celebrated itself for being a sort of regulation leader in the digital markets. In less than a decade, Europe has delivered the GDPR, the DMA, the DSA, the AI Act, and countless data sharing initiatives. Since we are likely, and I would add hopefully, approaching to the end of this journey, there are some questions and doubts that arise from regarding the overall strategy, I would say. In particular, it seems to me that there are three main questions that need to be addressed. First, is Europe truly leading and shaping the global regulatory agenda? The second question is, can innovation genuinely be fostered through regulation? And finally, I would say that there is a question about whether the chosen approach really enhances the competitiveness of European companies, or does it merely serve to shield some legacy homegrown players from the competition posed by global players? Well, I have to admit that I have serious doubts about positive answer to any of these questions. I guess that we will have the opportunity to discuss them further, but it seems to me that these are the key points, whether regulation should play the role that the European Commission think should play in fostering competition and innovation, whether we have been even able to achieve a real leadership in the regulatory agenda, and which is the impact on competition and consumer in terms of product and service in digital markets. And I guess that it seems to me that there are several doubts and questions, and the new approach that the new Commission seems to follow somehow is acknowledging what they have been called so many times unintended consequences.
Very much so, very much so. So Professor Colangelo actually gave me the cue to start with the guiding questions that are gonna, in a way, try to shape our conversation today. And I would like to start with considering exactly consumer protection and innovation. So we all agree that there's something that the EU is getting wrong about digital regulation. So how do you think the EU can recalibrate its regulatory framework in order not only to foster innovation, but also to foster the investment that comes with it, while at the same time maintaining market fairness and consumer protection? Do you think certain regulations should be streamlined? Some regulations might actually need a reboot, or some should be reconsidered. But for this question, I would actually like to start again with MEP Salla.
Thanks so much. Yeah, we need to remember that this omnibus package coming from the Commission on digital regulation, I don't think that they can include the DSA, the DMA, and the AI Act, because those regulations just came to force, and also we are still waiting the enforcement of the AI Act starting this August. So we need to first see how these laws are enforced and what will be the impacts of these. So unfortunately, I think we need to revisit these in a couple of years. What they said that they will withdraw are these very unfortunate proposals on standard essential patents, which I was really happy to hear that they withdraw, because that was a proposal that tried to fix something that it's not broken in the market. And the same thing with the AI liability directive, because we already have the AI Act now coming into force. So it was a good sign from the Commission that we don't need yet another regulation there or directive. But one thing that I didn't see on that list that I wanted to see there is the CSAM regulation, particularly the proposal that came from the Hungarian presidency was super worrying, because it proposed the client-side scanning to our messenger services. So this also tells us that the Commission and the lawmakers, they don't really understand what they are regulating when they are proposing some surveillance tools to our messaging services. And they say it's for protecting minors and children, but it's the opposite. It's the opposite. And if you start building any backdoors to end-to-end encrypted messaging services, it means that the backdoors are there also for criminals. So you need to understand what you regulate. And this is something that I'm really highlighting here. And what comes to, for example, AI Act also, this process of code on practice that they try to now simplify the rules, or maybe not simplify, but to make companies understand how they need to comply. It also tells the same story. Even the regulators, they don't understand what they are trying to enforce in August. So this is super worrying for our companies and for our market and for our competition. And then how the Commission did that. They invited thousands of people, NGOs, companies, like individuals, to one Teams call and told them how they want them to comply with the rules. And the code and practice even went beyond the law. So you get the message here that it's super complicated. And it's also very, very difficult for small and mid-sized companies to even follow what they are supposed to do. So, and when Commissioner Virkkunen says that, oh, the AI Act doesn't concern small companies. I'm sorry, you have obviously never worked in the private sector if you say something like that. First of all, small companies, they work for bigger companies. So if you have some rules for the bigger companies, they will also request smaller companies working for them to comply with these rules. And the second thing is the aim of the SME is to grow the peer scale up and a big company. So of course they need to comply with the rules. So these are very worrying signals from Brussels, trying to understand how private sector works, how business models of these companies actually works. And let me just stop by saying that one of my very, very, unfavorite regulation is copyright, where the same story repeats that I'm saying here is that, how many euros did the artists in Europe actually get after copyright? I told 2015, time after time, those famous 11 and 13 back in the days articles that, you will not get a single penny from Facebook if you propose this law, because you don't get the business model of these companies. And if you don't get the business model of these companies, you don't get any euros from them. So we need to start understanding what we are regulating if we actually want to regulate. And I completely disagree with Anu Bradford on this Brussels effect in that way that, China, US, Russia, they will never have this kind of rules because US is all for free market. China and Russia are authoritarian regimes. Maybe some small countries will put forward set of regulation, but not our competitors. So that puts us in a very difficult position. We will never have this kind of a big global digital champions competing against the US as long as we have this kind of a set of very unclear rules in the EU.
Thank you very much. I would like to hear Madam Datta's thoughts about it.
I think it's an interesting question to analyze why we need all these regulations. Firstly, what's the purpose of it? The main tech legislations have been used to improve consumer protection in the EU. For example, we saw Commissioner Ribeira's comments yesterday on the DMA that she hopes that these fines will improve the quality of EU consumers and EU users using these platforms. So I think it's interesting to know a bit more why we would need these regulations. Under the work program of the Commission this year, there are calls for simplification, although it's a bit unclear what that would mean. We saw that there are two aspects. There's a simplification of the overall digital laws, and then there's a planned fitness check later in the year for digital policy. So it would be a bit more interesting also to understand what is in the mind of Commissioner Virkkunen, Commissioner Ribeira, and any other commissioners dealing with that and how that would work. For us, we use previous examples to understand also what's on the pipeline. So last year, there was a study on digital fairness that came out in September. And that was under the consumer acquis of the EU, and that took roughly 2 years. So as reporters, the question is also whether, if there's a simplification push, firstly, which laws would that include, and also how long is that going to take, and what's really the political agenda of the Commission, this mandate. But also interested to hear MEP Salla's thoughts on these. I think it's an interesting perspective to see what is on the mind of the co-legislators and different political groups on this, and how much they would be involved also practically in the simplification push. Yes, thanks.
If Professor Colangelo doesn't mind, I would actually ask Madam Salla if she has any, if she has a reply.
reply to if I think that the Commission is doing the right things this year or not. I need to see. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Maybe Madam Datta can rephrase the question.
We would actually be also interested to know in this overall simplification push, how involved would the co-legislators be?
Me too. No, but as you know, it's a Commission proposal. So, unfortunately, they are not asking a lot of our opinions. We, of course, welcome them to our committees. But I have to say that what comes to competition particularly, Ms. Ripera has not been in ITRE committee, not even once. And it has been super difficult getting her there. That worries me a lot, because she should be listening to co-legislators and particularly Parliament on this matter. Like all other commissioners, Virkkunen came right away to exchange views, but she has not been there. And that also tells a story how she wants to interact with us. Of course, we have our own channels to talk with the Commission officials, and I'm sure that the commissioners are also listening to us, but it's very difficult for us to provide any messages if we don't know what they are cooking. So I would say that they would need to involve us much, much more. But that's why I'm doing the public events like today also, to making my voice also heard, because I'm looking very much forward for this simplification package, but it's now in the hands of the Commission. And my worry is that we will see on Digital Fairness Act even more regulation coming. We hear about dark patterns, we hear about protecting minors. We hear many things that were left out from the regulations, from the DSA, from the copyright for AVMS directive, for example, that they are trying to bake in everything that was left out. So that worries me a lot, because I don't think it's the right moment to actually propose anything new. So if you have answered that question, I'm eager to hear. But this is how much we are involved right now.
Thank you. So I would like to ask Professor Colangelo now, how do you think the EU should recalibrate their legislation, keeping in mind consumer protection and while fostering innovation and prompting investment?
Well, actually, I agree on the main point that has been highlighted in previous intervention. That is the entire approach that should be reconsidered. It has been previously mentioned, the standard essential patent proposal, regulatory proposal, where it is even unclear the market failure that the proposal was supposed to address. So unfortunately, is not a problem that is related to a single intervention. It is the overall approach that should be completely reconsidered. Regulation has been so far the preferred European answer to the entire digital transformation. The main concern has been to ensure that the regulatory framework is fit for purpose. And actually, if the expected results don't come, or even when unintended consequences are generated, EU policymakers react, usually say, not questioning the treatment, but rather suggesting to increase the dosage. After all, again, the European has assumed that it could lead and deliver innovation through regulation, while actually competition rather than regulation is the key driver of innovation and competitiveness. And there are so many reasons why we should not rely so heavily on regulation. Without proper justification, regulation negatively interferes with market dynamics in generating inefficiency, introducing artificial barriers to entry, deterring technological innovation. Further, I would add that it is extremely difficult calibrating regulation. Although regulation is expected to be forward-looking, it may lack flexibility. We are seeing it, for instance, in the DMA, introducing a rigid set of rules, which eventually risk reflecting a static view of the market at the expense of its dynamic evolution. Finally, we have to admit that consistent with the public choice theories, government intervention is often prone to regulatory capture. The risk is that it is guided by the interests of specific groups rather than aimed at promoting social welfare. And even if these limits belong to regulation in general, these limits are even more critical when it comes to fast-moving industries. It is challenging to design a future-proof framework. Therefore, especially when it comes to digital transformation, it seems to me more appropriate to embrace a sort of regulatory humility, acknowledging the limits of regulation and refraining from picking winners or losers in the marketplace, preemptively intervening in absence of solid evidence of market failure and consumer harm. What strikes me that when it comes to several of these interventions, we actually did not have a real impact assessment. In the case of the standard essential pattern, we have even data that contradict the impact assessment that feeded the proposal. So we should heavily rely on empirical evidence in order to assess whether there is a real market failure, rather than intervening just because we are afraid of the future or we are just trying to handle something that we do not know actually how it works and how it may evolve. And this is especially crucial when it comes to DMA, DSA, and the AI Act.
Thank you very much. I would like actually to keep the talk and go a little bit deeper into the impact of regulation. I mean, we've been mentioning a few things before, but I would like to delve a little bit more into that. So I will be directing the question to Madame Salla first. What do you think the actual impact of regulations such as GDPR, the AI Act, and the whole corpus is going to be on, for example, AI development, which is a priority in Europe right now, or data-driven business models? Is, as you said, that you got to understand the business models in order to regulate that, if you want to regulate it. And on top of that, what the impact is going to be on Europe's digital sovereignty?
The problem with digital sovereignty is that we need to actually understand what it means. It means that we need to have data. We need to have data to develop AI. And that's something that the EU is lacking, or the European companies are lacking. And we are heavily reliant on data from the US. It's due to the fact that, yes, there is a lot of regulation regarding data, and I'm talking about metadata and traffic data, so not personal data, but behavioral data that is required to develop AI. And this regulation certainly doesn't help that. And as said, we are heavily reliant on the data economy with the US. And as a professor also mentioned here, that's why it is crucial to talk also about the data transfers. And I think this will become a big deal at some point with Trump. And we need to be prepared. As you remember, last time when we had the deal a couple of years back after Schrems 2, it required Biden and von der Leyen actually closing the deal. So it went that level. At the same time, we need to also remember that these American companies are reliant on data transfers from the EU. So let's see what kind of a fight we might have there. It also comes back to the question, can Europeans request their data from the US? As you remember, there is now this redress mechanism in the Washington, or there was a redress mechanism in the Washington that you could request your data, and now Trump is watering that down. So I know that there are privacy NGOs already now super worried what happens to European data, and can you still request that, because that was part of the deal with the data transfers agreement. So this will be a very big question for our sovereignty also. But the thing is that we are, as said, we are heavily relying on that data. What we need to do right now is to enable data, cross-border data, behavioral data, but it even comes more difficult after the enforcement of the AI Act, because no one actually knows how this 300 pages of AI Act will be enforced in August. And this brings more uncertainty to this market, and that worries me. So what we need to do right now is to clarify what kind of rules we actually put in place. How is the DMA actually enforced? Like now with these fines, I mean, for example, let's take an example of Meta, that they provided the subscription model, and the commission was not happy with the subscription model. Okay, and then now they are telling them that we will fine you because you didn't have the model that we actually requested. But it's super unclear what they are requesting also. With Apple, I think the case is quite clear. But if you would actually go against Meta, you would need to go against their business model, against their algorithmic model, against their data collection. But they go against that kind of things that I don't think that actually will hurt the company that much, and the fines are not really high. So I don't really get this DMA unit. I never understood their approach because I always felt that they don't really understand how these companies actually make money and what will hurt them. So that worries me a lot when Booking.com walks into that office, and when Zalando walks into that office, and hopefully one day Nokia will walk into that office. So that being said, building European sovereignty, we need to have clarity for these rules. We need to cut the red tape. It is super difficult right now, but let's start with the GDPR because it comes to a review next. Let's make a proper impact assessment of these regulations. And also what is required for the sovereignty is a lot more risk capital, cross-border risk capital, because right now our companies, they go to the US when they need to actually scale up. When you need 100 million euros, you go to the US. So that's something that we need to underline here also when we talk about regulation and sovereignty in the EU.
Thank you very much. I would pass the mic to Madam Datta. What do you think is the impact of the current set of regulation on the industry development?
While listening to MEP Salla, I was thinking about the Paris AI Summit about 2 months ago, where the conversation around AI Act and AI regulation took also a different turn than the conversation that regulators were having when the AI Act was discussed. And there were a lot of political calls to bring more cash into AI development and AI investment within the EU. And indeed, as a journalist, our first question was, where is this money coming from? Some announcements included 10 billion, more 109 billion. We were playing with numbers as if the money was readily available. So, of course, the first question for us is if there are investments from the EU on creating, on boosting AI development for companies. Where are they going to get the money from? Are they investments? Is it just cold hard cash, let's say, or is it something else? That would be interesting to know. Of course, Commissioner Verkunen also presented her AI Continent Action Plan, which has a lot of elements addressing this. So would be interesting to see now how that plan is implemented. And also alongside, there are 4 other public consultations on these topics that are open now. So I think it would be a moment for the private sector to let regulators, but also quite fundamentally reporters like us know, okay, what is the problem with the AI Act? Where is there an enforcement gap? What can the EU do to help out, let's say? And lastly, what's really interesting is the conversation now in this new mandate around cutting red tape and simplification pushes than the conversations that were in the previous mandate, where there was this notion that regulation will help innovation. Now, indeed, it is up to Professor and MEP Salla to decide what the correct choice is, because for us it's always interesting to understand what is the political and the, let's say, company push against both these ways. So also interested to hear more thoughts about, on the one hand, there's this innovation versus regulation debate that has been taking place in Brussels all these years. And now, on the other hand, we have this push from the Commission on simplifying rules, having more investment. Where is this investment coming from, let's say? So also happy to hear more in the future what these conversations will mean as the mandate goes forward by the Commission.
Thank you. I would close our round directing the question to Professor Colangelo first, and then maybe if MP Salla has something to add, it's very much welcome. Professor?
Yes, I would say that much has been already written about the negative effects, especially of the GDPR. At some point, we should stop describing them as unintended consequences if many were predicted in advance. I would rather focus on the AI Act, which seems to me the epitome of such an approach in which regulation anticipates phenomena that we are not yet able to fully understand, let alone predicting their evolution. And as an example, let's think about the debate on the copyright protection in generative AI, in particular on training data. We know that since AI training relies on vast amounts of data, there are two conflicting interests that emerge. On one end, we have copyright that can act as a major barrier to entry, potentially stifling the next wave of technological innovation. On the other hand, we have generative AI systems that may pose an existential threat to creative industry by replicating human creativity, producing literally and artistic work faster at a lower cost. So you cannot be surprised that policymakers worldwide are striving to balance these seemingly opposing interests. However, when it comes to Europe, most discussions focus on how copyright holders should be compensated rather than on when compensation is appropriate. On this issue, we had a last-minute addition to the AI Act, which described the policy that provider of general-purpose AI models must implement to comply with the rights reservation established in the previous Digital Single Market Directive. And this last-minute addition has been severely criticized as unfeasible and economically unsound for two main reasons. Because on the one hand, the fulfillment of the transparency obligation imposed by the AI Act could be hindered by several factors, such as the fragmentation of copyright across jurisdiction, the complexity of identifying right holders through automated processes, and managing payments. On the other hand, even if copyright holders succeed in reserving their rights and preventing the use of their work for AI training, this will not necessarily result in licensing agreements. Instead, you run the risk to incentivize a company to relocate to countries with more favorable regulation, such as Singapore, for instance. As a consequence, you have, as a final scenario, an outcome that is contrary to the Pareto optimality, where everyone is worse off. The EU risks losing its appeal as an hub for AI development due to restricted access to copyright materials, and authors run the risk to receive zero remuneration. This is the type of discussion that we should have before adopting rules, last-minute addition that actually run the risk to undermine the entire ecosystem and the evolution of AI for Europe.
Here, I couldn't agree with you more, and I think this also underlines my point here that you need to understand what you are regulating. I was never like, in this camp, or I didn't even understand these people who said that regulation will actually encourage innovation, because it has never been the case, I would say. So yes, there needs to be some rules, don't get me wrong. What comes to privacy, for example, I think the EU has quite good rules what comes to privacy. GDPR is definitely not perfect, but we have quite secure market in that sense, that our private data is secured. Sometimes even too much, because I would like to see some cross-border or enable cross-border also transfers for private data what comes to health, for example, if I requested myself and so on. But we are working on that with EID and so on. However, I don't see that this kind of a regulation, uncertain, unclear regulation that we have put in place would enable at all innovation. And also now it is proven that it's not the case, because we don't see these companies scaling up in this market. Innovation goes, unfortunately, elsewhere, or maybe not even, it goes elsewhere, at least what comes to big companies that can scale at the global stage.
Thank you very much, everyone. I would like to move for our last question a little bit more towards DSA and DMA and get a little bit into deep on that. I mean, there's a lot of debate on whether the DMA and DSA actually enhance competition, or they actually have the unintended consequence of limiting Europe's ability to grow our own domestic tech giants. What are your thoughts on that? And on the second part of that debate, really, which is related to data and to privacy, and that is the data security issue. So I would like to start again with Madame Salla.
Well, I think I answered already to this question quite profoundly, but maybe I would like to underline that DSA and DMA are two very different regulations. So the DMA is an ex-ante regulation for competition. And if you are listening to actual experts on this, they all say that ex-ante regulation is expensive and it doesn't work that well. And I think the DMA also is proving the point there. I just simply don't see that the DMA, as it is enforced right now, is helping companies. We are just getting like a bad service here. If Apple would comply, then I think that self-preferencing would not be the strong case there. I would say that would help our companies, but Apple is not actually complying. They are taking the fines instead. So even that doesn't work. On what comes to Google, for example, I just think that I'm getting a lousy service right now, thanks to the DMA. And thanks to the DSA as well. On Meta, I don't really care. I think those are just the fun sites. Not fun in that sense that they have a lot of harm. They are doing a lot of harm, but as a consumer, you can choose not to use those services or to use those services. But with Google, you need to live quite a lot, you want it or not. So I would like to have a good service there. So I just don't think that this ex-ante regulation is working as it is right now. It's also due to the fact that, as I said earlier, this DMA is very unclear, and there is a lot of room for political interpretation, which is never been the case with a law or regulation, and that worries me a lot. And this brings me also to the DSA. When we saw those comments made by a previous commissioner, Breton, how he interpreted the DSA, that was super worrying, because there should not be a room for political interference after the law is in the place and enforced. And this definitely has been the case. So we need to also remember that these companies, Google, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, you name it, they are sending data and information to the commission for them to assess, right? But they are choosing what they send. So let's be very honest here. So proof points, can we reclaim those? I'm not so certain. And also the problem with the DSA is that, like Professor also said, we have so many regulators. We have in member states very different enforcers and regulators dealing with the DSA. And that creates a problem for holistically for this market. So companies cannot really be certain how this is enforced in Romania, in Luxembourg, in Finland. And according to the DSA, for example, you can request why my post or my ad is not out there. What is the problem? I don't think that every regulator can actually find out the solution there if the company doesn't reply. And what we saw in Romania, for example, in the elections, we also saw that the DSA is not a tool to prevent something like this happening. It's only a tool to assess when something happened, why it happened. So what's the point then there? There are good things about the DSA, definitely, don't get me wrong. And I think that these companies, they need regulation. But the way the DSA was designed, and definitely how the DMA was designed, this is not good for consumers, this is not good for our companies, and this is not for the EU sovereignty. So what is this for? Maybe it was the first exercise, and now we fine-tune these regulations. But the thing is that European competition and competitiveness doesn't wait. We are losing this game, and that worries me.
Thank you very much for clarifying your points even more. Then I would address the question to Madame Datta next.
I mean, I think one thing a bit to pick up, which we often suffer as journalists, is a bit in the lack of transparency in the enforcement of the DMA and the DSA. By that I mean, yesterday, as you saw, Meta and Apple were issued with these fines, which we believe is a drop in a big ocean. So whether they're dissuasive or not is for the Commission and the co-legislators to decide. But what was interesting is that we tried to ask the Commission quite specifically how the fines are decided. Is there a methodology? Is there a guidance as it is in antitrust law? But we were not told specifically how they're decided. It was more based on the gravity, duration, and let's say a conversation, a regulatory dialogue between the Commission and these big tech companies. And I was reading this analysis this morning conducted by Proton, which is another company, on how long would it take for Meta and Apple to pay off these fines. In Meta's case, the fine is 200 million for the pay and consent, and it said that it would take them 36 hours of work to pay it off, so a bit more than 1 day. And in the case of Apple, which is around 500 million euros, it said that they would pay it off in 45 hours. So these are based on how much revenue it's generated. So it was quite interesting to understand that and see whether indeed the DMA fines are dissuasive or are they just slapped for more of a political statement, let's say. So always interested to engage with the Commission a bit more on that. I mean, unfortunately, we saw neither Commissioner Ribeiro or Verkunen to ask these questions yesterday, as they were both not in Brussels to present these fines, which was indeed a pity. And then quickly jumping on the DSA as well. Indeed, I've been covering DSA since the beginning of this year, so it was quite interesting. On the first day, actually, I was at Euractiv. There was a debate between Musk and Alice Weidel from the AfD, which was live streamed on X, and the question was whether this can be seen as in breach of the DSA or not. And that still remains an open item to extend the ongoing investigations against X. on that topic. So it would also indeed be interesting to see how now under the DSA, the Commission deals with the case against X, which would be an interesting discussion, not just from an enforcement perspective, but also from a geopolitical perspective and from a political perspective, how this fine is calculated and on what basis, or whether indeed X is even in breach of the DSA. Now, I will let the co-legislators also again assess whether the DSA is indeed an effective tool to do so. But I think for us, it's it's interesting to understand the rationale from the Commission on how they impose fines under these two legislative instruments.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's going to be very, very interesting to see, and I'm sure we're going to read all about the developments on Euractiv as well. Lastly, I would like to address the question to Professor Colangelo and ask him maybe to focus a little bit more on the security debate, since something I actually failed to mention before in the introduction, he also authored a paper for Epicenter focusing exactly on the security debate. So.
Yes, thanks. Well, I would say that it is early to evaluate the impact of the DMA and DSA. Nonetheless, there are significant concerns about the approach that has been followed. In general terms, what I agree, in particular, with what have been said before, is that there is a significant failure that I see coming from this regulation, that is their inability to achieve their main mission, that was to guarantee a sort of reducing the regulatory fragmentation. Actually, what we are witnessing is an increasing of regulatory fragmentation, because we see that at national level, actually there is a competition among authorities in order to intervene, because some conduct and practice may be tackled under different provisions despite the existence of EU regulation. And of course, this increased uncertainty, there is a risk of overlap and potential conflicting decision in different countries and even within the same country. And then there is a conflict also between national enforcer and the European Commission. So that's a huge issue that apparently this regulation has been unable to solve, but actually they determine another source of fragmentation. When it comes specifically to the DMA, the main risk that I see involve the overall structure, which is based on a long list of narrow rules, obligations that apply to any designated gatekeeper despite the significant difference in terms of business model. We are already witnessing negative effects on some type of business user. And we may mention some example that, as you briefly mentioned, actually are related to the difficulty in addressing some key trade-offs that involves consideration of competition, innovation, privacy, and security. And so, for instance, we may see that there are target provisions on vertical interoperability that may deliver results and increase competition in mobile ecosystem. However, at the same time, we have to find a way to ensure that solutions are not undermining security. On the other side, we have rules against target advertising that raise challenge in terms of the interface with privacy, but there is also potential negative effects on the competition between large and small business users. So it seems to me that there is an underestimated evaluation of this key trade-off. And finally, when it comes to the DSA, we have some first empirical results about the moderation obligation over dominant platform, which are actually not particularly encouraging, as they show a sort of balloon effect, meaning that the removal of content from a target platform does not eliminate the demand for that content, but just redirects it elsewhere. And actually, if we think about it, these results are pretty consistent with the empirical literature that has already analyzed the impact of the takedown request and other measures implemented against copyright infringement. Once again, we should learn not only from the history, but we should learn also from the previous empirical study that has been run, because several consequences that we try to describe as unpredictable or unintended actually have been easily predicted in advance. And the way in which we decide to deal with the trade-off that we have to tackle, actually, this is not clear, because again, if you look at the relationship between competition and privacy and security, is it clear to us the ranking of this value? Because if you put this value on the table, it depends on the enforcer. Because of course, if you are talking about a data protection enforcer, the data protection enforcer is telling you that the privacy is the greater good. And so every other value, every other economic value, ranks lower than privacy. But we know that we have to strike a balance, that privacy cannot prevail in absolute terms over competition, that security cannot prevail in absolute terms over competition. But same works for competition and innovation. We cannot undermine privacy and security. It is not clear to me whether we are pretty and fully aware of the way in which we have to handle this trade-off.
Thank you very much. There's a lot of food for thought. And in the last couple minutes of our talk today, I would like to move to the Q&A session, because we already have a couple questions from our audience. So I'll go with the first. What do you think of the AI Continent Action Plan? Do you think the private investment needed for gigafactories is feasible? Do you not like it? What would you have done differently? So I'm just gonna leave you free to answer that. Whoever wants to address the question. Maybe Madam Datta?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit early to assess the impact of the AI Continent Action Plan. It was just announced. I think it's interesting to see, as I said, also where this investment and where this cash would come from, who would it go to. I think if something I would have done differently would be to make a bigger deal about it. Yeah, that would be one of the main things. But I would leave the other questions to the other panelists on the Continent Action Plan.
Thank you very much. Next question is actually for MEP Salla and Professor Colangelo. It seems like the actions and the words of the Commission are not always consistent. On the one hand, the top leadership of the Commission talks about regulatory simplification. On the other hand, now it's considering new regulation for the Digital Fairness Act, like banning personalized advertising online, which would have a massive negative impact on small and medium businesses, as MEP Salla mentioned. What does MEP Salla and Professor Colangelo think? Which side of the Commission should we believe? The pro-regulation or the pro-simplification side? Madam Salla first.
Okay. Pro-regulation side, Commission will always regulate. That's in their DNA. When you are appointed as a commissioner, you want to leave your stamp to the history. Your legacy will be some kind of a lex. And I know that they will propose something on the Digital Fairness Act. And this is why I'm underlying that I'm super worried about that. Personalized advertising, my God, I was still working in the Commission. I worked there 6 years, and I was in so many meetings when people who were actually drafting these regulations bragged about never using social media, for example. How do you know what you draft and regulate if you never use these apps or these services? That's why I'm underlying that. I don't think that they know what they are regulating. Personalized advertising, I'm sorry, Commission. They went against this heavily, and they repeated time after time. And Commissioner Johansson last time said that micro-targeting, personalized advertisement, it's from the hell, literally. And at the same time, then they used Facebook targeted advertising, advertising CSAM regulation. So this tells you a story where the Commission comes from, and so they don't even believe that we should ban personalized advertising. I can tell you that I have made so many grassroots campaigns when I had literally nothing, a student loan, and I ran in my first political campaign 2012, and I could not buy advertising on newspapers or streets because it's super expensive. What I could do is put €5 to social media back in the days when it was still possible, and so on and so forth. So you need to understand, as Professor said, what you are also banning, when you are banning personalized advertising, because it's for small companies. It's for people who are doing these kind of small campaigns for, let's say, Palestinians or some minority groups. So you need to understand what you are talking about here. So answering to your question, I think that the Commission will keep regulating. I don't think that they will withdraw unfortunate regulation. I think that they will have many proposals coming even this year. So it is for us, for the co-legislators, to be really now awake and be super vocal and loud, like I am here today, trying to also make public understand what the Commission is doing. And I think that the Commissioner Virkkunen and Ripera and Grant, they all should be there in the press room, like literally every week, answering to these questions coming from Euractiv or Politico. What are you actually going to do? Because SMEs are suffering, scale-ups are suffering, and we should not pour public funding for this. This is not the answer. We need to get private capital wanting to invest in the EU. And that's what we need. What we need for our data economy, cloud services. It's not fixed with some EU funds.
Thank you very much. And I might add, this is a very sore point for me professionally, since I am an advertiser with a very small budget. So that's exactly. So since we have but a few seconds left, really, because we already went a little bit over time, I would just go straight for Professor Colangelo now.
Well, unfortunately, I have just to agree once again with MEP Salla about the incentive and the intention of a commissioner. I mean, of course, we may expect that everyone wants to mark its term with a flagship initiative. We have listened so many times about this. My humble suggestion was to ban fairness from the title of any regulatory proposal or European proposal, because we have seen fairness for the DMA, for the platform to business regulation in the Data Act. Even when it comes to copyright, they describe it in terms to achieve a fair marketplace. Now we are talking about digital fairness. Actually, it seems to me that the revival of fairness is just a convenient shortcut to allow more discretion to policymakers. Because again, who can complain about something that is declared to be fair? But actually, we know that there is nothing that is fair in general terms. We have to, first of all, state fair for who? Business user, end user, platform, intermediaries. I mean, it's just a catchy wording that actually is not delivering nothing rather than increase the room for discretion in intervention, in protecting interests that we cannot know in advance if there are specific interests or general interests. Usually are pretty specific interests. Thinking about press publisher and telecommunication company, it's been, I don't know, a decade that we are, more than a decade that we discuss about fair share value gap. Again, everything is about fairness, but actually is the redistribution of revenue and rents that not necessarily is something that we may describe as a problem of fairness at the very end.
So I think our time is up. So I would like to thank everyone for sticking with us today, even a little bit longer than the allotted time. We really appreciate it. So I would like to thank our speakers first, and to also point to our audience that if you want to know more about Epicenter's findings on the way the EU should shape their digital regulation, you might find the link in the chat to a very complete study. So in short, thank you very much for staying with us today, and hope to see you on the next.
Have a good day.